All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to get started in just a second. Just so you know, this is going to be recorded and it'll be on YouTube and our website to share following the event. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Alyssa quickly, who's our esteemed guest tonight. Alyssa Mastromonaco is a New York Times bestselling author of Who Thought This Was a Good Idea, and So Here's the Thing, and a co-host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast. She served as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations from 2011 to 2014, and prior to that had several positions in President Barack Obama's administration campaign, Political Action Committee, and Senate office, where she began serving in 2005. Currently, she's on the board of the non-partisan voter registration organization, headcount.org, and the boards of University of Vermont Honors College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Visitors Board. Alyssa is an activist for women's reproductive health care and loves rescuing cats. She is married and splits her time between New York City and Columbia County in New York. We are ecstatic to have her here with us tonight. This evening's forum will be primarily directed by questions submitted by students prior to the event, and we will also be taking questions via the Q&A bottom, which would be at the bottom of your screen during the event.
All right, we will go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank you so much for being with us, Alyssa. We're so excited to spend this next hour with you. We do have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to jump straight in.
Go for it. And Ruby, thank you for the very generous intro. I appreciate it.
So yes, first of all, we're going to talk about the, shall we say, unusual debate we experienced a few days ago. So I just first want to hear some of your general thoughts and key takeaways.
Whew. So to put in context, I worked for John Kerry in 2004 when he ran against George Bush. And I was at some of those debates with him and at debate prep. And then, of course, I worked for Barack Obama, both in 2008 and 2012. So a couple of things. One, going into the debate, two things. One, incumbent presidents almost never do great their first debate out of the gate, right? Because, you know, like we would say, if you go back and watch the first debate that Barack Obama did in 2012 against Mitt Romney, I mean, we would joke when we watched it. I mean, at the time it was not funny, but afterwards we were like, it's like he was annoyed, you know, because you have someone who spent 4 years talking to world leaders and hosting the G20 and the G7. And like, all of a sudden now you're like dealing with this person and it's annoying. So there was that. So I was going to already give Donald Trump, for whatever it's worth, a bit of a break. That debate was like an utter tragedy. America got stupider for watching it. It was rude. Donald Trump's theory of the game was essentially to be a monster, right? That's what he did. I mean, Chris Wallace got on Fox News today and said, because in fairness, people were really criticizing Chris Wallace. I do not know what a human could have done to stop that freight train. I mean, when you come in with a theory of destruction, it's hard to put that back in a box. So I kind of give Chris Wallace a pass on that. But no, it was terrible. I can't imagine. I mean, there were 73 million viewers, which is crazy, that like made it most of the way through that debate. So on the one hand, did a lot of people see something that was repellent? I don't know, because they stayed till the end. So I think that it will be interesting to see the next debate, which is a town hall format, and both Vice President Biden and President Trump will be getting questions from real people. So I think it's much harder to act like a monster to real people. I mean, I would hope so. Only because I think that turning debates like this into a cartoon is not good for anyone, doesn't like help really unify the country or move us forward in any way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it actually ties in really well to two other questions that we had from Emory students. Aditya J wanted to know like what, if anything, the public actually took away from this debate, or like what should the public hopefully take away from the next debate? And Junia S asked the real question, in my opinion, when she asked if there was any point in even having another debate.
So I do think I've seen this back and forth on Twitter where all good opinions are made. And I'll take the last question first. I do think another debate is really important because this one was such a caricature. You know, it was so pathetic. And I think that for all of us, Americans have the right to see these two people answer questions from actual Americans. And I think that that will make a difference if Trump can't do it, I think he sets himself on fire in a way that's irreversible, right? In a way that's catastrophic for him on election day. At the same time, for being fair, Joe Biden got a bit of a pass the other night because Donald Trump was so insane. And so Biden 100% did better than Trump. However, he didn't have a ton of standout moments. So I think that hopefully we will have another debate. Hopefully it's the town hall debate. Between now and then, we actually have the vice presidential debate next week with Kamala Harris and Mike Pence, which will be interesting. One, because I'm not being facetious. Like, Mike Pence doesn't go places alone with women. I'm guessing being on stage is going to be okay with he and Mother. I don't know. But he is a very good debater. He's a very good debater, and he's very smooth, and he is going to try and drive a wedge between, he's going to try to make Kamala pick sides, I think. He's going to be like, are you progressive? Are you some radical socialist? Are you some Bernie lover? Or are you a Biden person? And like, I think he's going to try and make some declarations, right? And that could be a little uncomfortable. So I think that's something they really need to prepare for. On the other hand, he's in charge of COVID and 208,000 people are dead and didn't have to be. So sort of a albatross around his neck. What was the first question?
What ideally would the public get out of a debate like this?
Yeah, so I think that what we got out of the first debate was that the current president has truly anger management issues. That the one thing I always think is interesting about him is that he is not an economist. He's not a politician. He's a fucking television producer, right? He's a TV producer. And so the one thing that he knows, which if you go back to 2016 and you look at the debates, he owned the stage. You know, he understood that the one thing he had over Hillary was that he understood television. And so that's like when he got it behind her back and when he interrupted her, but he did it more effectively because he seemed belligerent, I guess, but not out of control. And the other night he seemed out of control. So the other night I would say that we came away with a style, not substance debate. And so I hope with the next debate, we have much more substance.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to pivot a little bit to RBG and who is advancing. So we already know Trump has nominated Amy Coney Barrett to fill her place on the Supreme Court, who is a graduate of Notre Dame Law School and currently a circuit judge who was nominated by President Trump 3 years ago. So Divya K, Maya M, Colleen O, and Sarah D all have questions about the fate of women's reproductive rights on a 6-3 stacked conservative court. Colleen is especially curious about what options the legislative branch has in safeguarding women's rights to autonomy and self-determination. Specifically, there's been some talk about the ratification of the ERA as a means to fight back. What are some of your thoughts about the legislative branch and their options going forward?
Okay, so a couple things. This SCOTUS fight is not on the level. This is not a fair fight. This is not, if we go back to what Mitch McConnell did to Barack Obama with Merrick Garland, this is like an illegal seat. You know, he shouldn't be doing this. And RBG, may her memory be a revolution, she would be really upset. I mean, can you imagine, like, her dying wish was, can the next president deal with this, to fill her seat? And Donald Trump was like, tap dancing on your grave, RBG. So Amy Coney Barrett, whose name I have a very hard time spitting out, not only is she not for Roe v. Wade, today there was actually, which if you're a government nerd like I am, very interesting article. If you're interested in it, look it up. It's by Heidi Presbala on NBC News. And it's when you become a justice, when you get nominated to be a justice to the Supreme Court, the vetting process is extreme. And it's something that I oversaw as Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House. The questionnaires are beyond your wildest imagination, especially for a SCOTUS. And when you get it, like if you, and Heidi makes this point in her article, is that the vetting is so intense that if someone came to your door 10, 15, 20 years ago and asked you to sign a petition about a pothole or something on your street or an initiative in your community, you needed to list that on your form. Everything you've ever written, everything you've ever said, it has to be included for your Judiciary Committee submission. She did not include the following: a 2-page ad in Indiana in a South Bend paper that she signed on to, so it was her name, that was so anti-abortion, it qualified a fertilized egg as a person. And therefore, if you were doing IVF and you had fertilized eggs to be implanted and you discarded some of them, that was akin to abortion, which they feel should be criminalized, at least by the abortion provider. They're very clear to say they're not sure it should be, the woman should be criminalized, but the abortion provider should. So this woman is as fringe as we can imagine. So for women's rights, I'm a huge fan of the ERA. The ERA is not super practical. The amount of money and work it would take to get it ratified, because what happened is, it's actually, you guys, I could go on forever about this, but before 1983, was it 83? Yeah, ERA is defeated. National Organization for Women is like, Walter Mondale, you're the nominee, and you're going to pick a woman because we matter, and you're going to show us that we matter, and we are eventually going to ratify the ERA. Fast forward to how we got Geraldine Ferraro. Interesting. But it has been ratified. I think we're one state short. However, lots of like judicial folks would tell you that you'd have to go back and re-ratify for the states that ratified in the 70s and in the 80s. So not super practical. Mostly, I think that you would need the Senate to get together. I mean, you need a constitutional amendment, which is what the ERA would have been. I think that what will happen if Amy Coney Barrett is on the court is that Roe won't get overturned. They will just chip away at it with like these extreme caveats, right? Like we've seen over the past couple of months, which is interesting because Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, knows that the validity of the court is like on the line right now. And that's why I think he has been really dancing the line over the past couple of months with some of these decisions where he came down in ways that people were like, oh, hey, what, how did that happen? And it's because he knows that the way that, I mean, you guys, you may not recall because you're busy with school and I'm just on Twitter, that Trump was like tweeting at Chief Justice Roberts before some of these decisions came down. I mean, that's like insane. So mostly, I think for us, we have to vote. A lot of the polling that's not public, shows that Senate races that should not be in play right now for Democrats are in play. And so until we see what happens with the Senate in November, we just have to hope that we can fix it that way, because the other ways are very, very hard.
Yeah, I think that leads really well into our next question from Ben C. He had a really clear question. He asked, if Trump's Supreme Court pick gets confirmed, what do you see as the future of the relationship between the judicial and executive branches? I think that you could take that many, many different ways with all the things we're hearing about expanding the court and other issues.
So expanding the court is interesting. I'm sure many of you know Dan Pfeiffer from Pod Save America, one of my best friends. We have talked a lot, and he has done a lot of research and writing about expanding the court. One of the things that I think is the most important thing that we can do is change the term limits, or actually give term limits to Supreme Court justices. if you had nine justices with 18-year term limits, you would have a SCOTUS up every 2 years, I think it is. And to me, that seems like the most reasonable thing to do. I think that 18 years is plenty of time. I think that if you look at the situations we have been in the past 4 years, however long it's been, it's justices who have been there a really long time, who we appreciate their service, but they've aged out. And so I think that, I think for me that, I think the judiciary should always be a separate branch. I think that seeing what Trump has done shouldn't make us change the way that we think about that. But I do think that there should be some guardrails around it that make it a little more fair, balanced.
Next, I'd like to pivot into your time at the White House. We got a ton of questions submitted that were really curious about your role, as well as any exciting stories you'd like to share with us. But first, I want to take it back a bit further. I know you majored in French and Japanese, is that correct, in your undergrad?
いいですよかね? I did, yeah. When I was at UVM.
How did you get your start in politics then? What was that like for you?
So I, like you said, was a French major, minor in Japanese. It was honestly so fun. I loved living in Burlington, Vermont, and I wanted to stay one summer. And my parents were like, if you want to stay, you need to be productive. And this is why like college is great if you're tuned in, right? And like sometimes I was tuned in and sometimes I wasn't. But Bernie Sanders was the member at large, independent from the state of Vermont in the U.S. House. And this was 1995, because he was up in 96. And so he would go door to door, like registering people and doing GOTV. And so I got to meet him a couple times. And like I met him with Howard Dean, who was governor at the time, or like and registering people to vote too. I mean, Vermont's a crazy place. But I applied to be an intern, and I got the job as an intern for Bernie in his congressional office, and then down on Church Street in Burlington. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and they were like very into me. They're like, "You're great. Look, you should come down to the campaign office." So I actually spent the summer, my days in the district office, and then my nights on the campaign office, and then my weekends is when I made money that paid my rent. But Bernie to me was a real distinction between politics and public service. And what I fell in love with in 1995 was public service. And the thing that I thought was great about it, as I was joking with you two earlier, I did not have the internet in college. And so when people needed help in Vermont, constituents, they didn't submit forms online, they called. And they got me on the phone. And so the thing that was so interesting to me, at the end of every day, I talked to all these people on the phone, which was sometimes very sad and sometimes very inspiring. But the thing that was always great is that at the end of the week, there was a meeting and a status update on what had happened with all these cases throughout the week. And even though I was an intern, they let me attend. And so I saw that when people cared, how much they could get done, whether it was Social Security benefits, working with the VA, immigration status. I mean, these people just worked really, really hard to make people's lives better in Vermont. And I found that really inspiring. And as part of my job, it's like I always tell young people, and you are young people, that if you don't do the shitty stuff well, they're never going to give you the actual good stuff. And so I did the shitty stuff really well. And then they used to let me pick Bernie up at the airport and drive him to events. And so we'd be in the car. My very old car had no air conditioning. And he'd be like, tell me what's happening. And the first time I was picking him up, I was like very nervous. And so I read the New York Times, like cover to cover. I got the Washington Post somehow. And I start like bragging, I guess, in the car. I'm like, well, here's what happened according to so-and-so in the New York Times. And he's like, ugh, with that. He's like, ugh. He's like, what happened in Vermont? And so it really, after that, I read the Rutland Herald and the Burlington Free Press and all the other papers. And so I just really felt like accomplished at the end of that summer. I felt like I'd really done something. I felt like what I had done mattered. And so I was transferring to UW-Madison, and trust me on this, all of the phones that I answered, I could have been a dick, right? I could have been frustrated. I could have been like, what's your name? And so, but one time this phone number comes up and it's 608 area code, which is Madison, Wisconsin. And it was a man named Ed Garvey who was calling for Bernie Sanders, and he was friendly. So I was like, oh, I'm moving to Madison in August. And he's like, well, come out here and see me, I'll give you a job. Well, Ed Garvey was basically one of the fathers of the progressive movement. He was the lawyer that unionized the NFL Players Association. He ran for governor several times out in Wisconsin and Senate, I think. And most notably, when I got arrested for having a fake ID, helped get me out of trouble. So you never know where answering the phone nicely is going to take you. But that is how I got into it. I worked for Ed for 2 years out in Wisconsin for his progressive groups, and also was invited back to do a DC internship with Bernie Sanders. And that was it. I was sold. That's what I wanted to do. I loved helping people. I loved the hustle and bustle. The whole thing was just like very exciting to me. Though, like I said, I don't love politics because I'm very conflict averse. So I don't like fighting with people about anything. So yeah, then I graduated college. I got no jobs. Sometimes those things happen. I worked in the World Trade Center, the original one, up until 2000. And then a girlfriend of mine who I met at the World Trade Center, who then became my roommate, because that's also how things happen when you graduate college, got into BC law. And I went to visit her. We saw John Kerry spoke. I'm like, what have I been doing? And I emailed them this mission statement that's like, I don't know what I've done with the past 2 years of my life. And they hired me. And I ended up being with John Kerry for a long time through his presidential run, and met Barack Obama because a dear friend of mine from the Kerry campaign, Robert Gibbs, who I'm sure so many of you know, went on to be White House press secretary under President Obama. He knew I was unemployed, and AOL instant a message popped up on my screen and was like, how are you? Do you need a job? I was like, I fucking need a job. And 2 weeks later, I met Barack Obama. So that is how I met Barack Obama.
Oh,
So you never know how things happen. Imagine how TikTok can change things. I can't even imagine.
That's great. So you've been with Obama a long time then, through his time in the Senate, campaigning, and then in the White House. So what did you learn during this time about Obama's leadership style? And how do you think that differs from Trump's? We also have a specific question from Andrew G, who wants to know if this election cycle will establish a new appreciation for that type of leadership style in the executive branch.
Sure. So the one thing that I can say about Barack Obama and what he taught me, what I took away from him, is that, and the leadership style I saw him demonstrate for all the years I was with him, is that he is someone who led with curiosity. He leads with curiosity. He never assumes he knows someone's whole story. He never assumes he knows the whole, like he's just, if you can be a curious person, if you disagree with someone and you go in and tell them why they're wrong, instead of listening to why they believe what they believe, you're missing out. And so one of the things that he always talked about was disagreeing without being disagreeable. He had a lot of friends. It's an interesting thing. You guys might be a bit young, but Senator Bob Byrd from West Virginia was someone who was a member of the Klan, like way back in the day. And he was senator when Senator Obama came to the U.S. Senate. And, he was one of the first people who asked to meet with him. Senator Byrd asked to meet with Senator Obama, and actually then years later asked Senator Obama to eulogize him at his funeral. And it's because things can change, but if you're not open to change, you're going to miss it. And Bob Byrd not only had learned and grown through the years, but so much that he wanted to know Barack Obama and learn from him. And the best part about it is that Barack Obama was open to that, right? He could have been like, you were once a racist and I'm not going to talk to you, but that's just never, ever how he was. And one of my favorite stories, which I've never really told, is that I used to do disaster relief and response and recovery in the White House as part of my job as deputy chief of staff. And one time we were going to a place where one of the congressmen had said something very racist about then Senator Obama. And I said, sir, don't you worry. You're not going to see him at all. I will keep him so far away from you. And he's like, oh no, that's not, no. Alyssa, that's not how we're going to do this. He's like, put him in the car with me when we land. And by the end of the day, that member of Congress who had said something really fucking terrible praised him at the press conference for coming to wherever we were and for like hearing people's stories. And so that is what I learned from Barack Obama. It can be summed up as don't be a dick, like open your ears and be curious. And I think that that's a huge distinction between he and Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump may actually be the least curious person on the planet. But the other difference, if we're talking about like the function of the White House, is completely illustrated by the COVID pandemic. And the one thing that you knew if you dealt with the Obama White House, specifically the West Wing, was if something happened, no matter what it was, if it was the computers failing when we launched the ACA, whether it was some prairie chickens going extinct out west, if it was Hurricane Sandy barreling up the coast, you knew who was in charge. And we used to call it being the point of the spear. We had a lot of fun sayings. It's who is the tip of the spear, and then whoever the tip of the spear was had to lead the process open kimono, which meant that you didn't get to the idea in some places that you'll see, whether it's in the private sector or in public service, is that there's this idea that somehow you gain power and maintain power by like hoarding information. And Barack Obama felt that that was stupid. And we essentially governed in if Alyssa gets hit by a bus tomorrow, we shouldn't notice, basically, that everything I do, there should always be other people with eyes on what I'm doing, whether it's a deputy or a policy expert or a working group. So you could know. And the thing is, when you leave the White House, it's actually kind of sad because you're like, everyone's going to miss me so much. And then you're like, oh no, because I ruled with the hit by the bus theory. So like, they're fine because I left like 20 binders. So I'd say that's the biggest difference. And so when we saw COVID, like for me, the middle of March, I guess it was like March 10th or so, I was in New York City where I live, and my husband and I start getting all these crazy reports that like Trump's going to shut down the bridges and tunnels in Manhattan. And then Cuomo's like, no, I'm not. And we were like, we can't trust Trump, so we have to get out of the city because we don't know who's telling the truth. And we know that they don't have an actual plan. And so I think that even if people politically didn't agree with Barack Obama, I think they fundamentally knew that we always had some kind of plan, like that we weren't going to leave people floundering at any point. So that's the biggest difference, I think.
I want to keep talking a bit about your time in the White House. Josephine S., Sarah S., and Anna S. all had questions about your role within the Obama administration. And Anna specifically wanted to know what the most challenging part of your job was, as well as the most challenging part of being a woman in politics. And Sarah wanted to know if your job was anything like The West Wing, the show.
Okay, so first, The West Wing, the television show. Yes, people don't talk as fast, and we have much better lighting than they do. It's like very romantic lighting all the time on that show. And we're like, there's nothing romantic about our lighting. Theirs seemed more like the old executive office building. The West Wing is essentially a house. And so like, it's very strange. Like you can hear people coming down the stairs. But I was Josh Lyman. That's who I would have been. And I like to answer the question because so many people assume I was Donna Moss just because I was a woman. I was like, no. She was Josh's assistant. I was Josh. So I was Josh. The interesting thing for me when I watch The West Wing is that it was a post 9/11 world when that show was filmed. So for me, it's not something that you guys would notice. But for me, I'm like, oh, you get worked up. You're like, that's crazy. They can't do that. And then you're like, oh, wait, it's like a we live in a post 9/11 world. But how it is perceived that they acted was like fairly accurate. Yeah, it's pretty accurate. I still watch it all the time. My job, tough part about being a woman. I wouldn't say that I struggled with being a woman as much as I struggled with being young. So by the time I was promoted to deputy chief of staff, I think, I'm always nervous to say this because I'm like, what if I'm off by a couple months? But it was always my understanding that I was the youngest deputy chief and maybe the youngest woman total, whole thing. When Susan Rice was national security advisor and she and I traveled the world together, I would be acting chief of staff on foreign trips. It was the first time the continuity of power was in two women's hands. And whenever we'd get in a bad mood, I'd be like, girl, we're so in control right now. And I think our car was actually called Control, so that's weird. But for me, ageism was something that I had to struggle with because a lot of the people who reported to me were much older than me. And so part of how I brought people on board, one of the things that Barack Obama used to say to me was that I should never go to a meeting in person because I was like the booming voice of Oz over the phone on conference calls. But in person, he said I was like Sally Field in The Flying Nun, or Gidget, which you guys can Google, but trust me, it's pretty accurate. So I brought people on board with curiosity. Like when my first meeting with the White House military office when I became deputy chief. The White House military office is composed of about 3,500 members of the military. It oversees and operates Air Force One, Marine One, Camp David, and a bunch of things I can't tell you about. And as the leader of the organization, I had the rank of a 4-star general. And so one of the first things we did was dispense with saluting me when I came into a room, especially when I was wearing a Kate Spade shirt with hearts on it one day, because that felt weird. But because these people had done their jobs for such a long time and were so good at their jobs, when I did my first briefing, I had my assistant help me and he sent me home with literally, it was like a 400-page binder. And he's like, here are all the things you need to know. And I was like, right, but I kind of know these things. And he's like, yeah, so you'll go in, you'll look smart. And I was like, I don't know. And so instead of going in and showing them what I knew, I was honest about what I didn't know. So I went through the binders and I said, you know what? I'm reading this, like, what's the black budget? Black budget is the classified budget, which I can't tell you about. And that was where we started, were the things I didn't know. And my genuine curiosity when they explained things and asking questions, it was the most important thing I think I could have done to get their respect and their acceptance. And it wasn't playing dumb. Like I wasn't playing dumb. I genuinely didn't know these things and I needed to know them. It was more that I wasn't faking it till I made it. I just was like, you know what? This is like American lives are at stake here. So let's just cut to the chase. So that was it. But it was hard sometimes when President Obama wanted to promote me to deputy chief. I literally said, like, I think you should go with someone else. Like, I think you might want someone else. Like, I've never done this before. And he's like, you're the best person for the job. Like, get over it. So I did it. And it turned out I was pretty good at it. So that was the hardest thing. What was the first part of the question?
Just what your day-to-day life was like. So I think you touched on that a little bit, as well as some of the
It was very, very busy. It was very busy. And as deputy chief, one of the other things that was part of my job is that when something very bad happened in the world or in the country between the hours of like 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., the Situation Room would call me on an actual red phone. Actually, if the red phone rang, it was very bad. And if the yellow phone rang, it wasn't that bad. And they would call me and we would talk about whether it had to go direct to the president or whether we call the chief of staff first. But I had a very small apartment and that phone and the secure comm system in my bedroom made it very, very hot. So I lived most of my life very, very hot.
So I want to touch a little bit on the campaign process because we had a lot of questions on that. But then I really want to get to talking about the transition of power. So just quickly, Lucy A and Kira D want to know what it was like working on an administration that was in the campaign process.
It was very hard. So as deputy chief, there are certain people within an administration, and this is going to blow your mind because this is the opposite of how it happens now. But there were very specific people who were authorized and worked with the White House counsel's office to deal with the campaign. I was one of those people. As such, any member of the cabinet that wanted to do anything political had to vet it through me, which is like the worst job on earth. But it kept us like in the box, you know, it kept us, the thing that you never want is that you never want to be, when you are working for administration and that person's up for reelection, you never want there to ever be one ball that was dropped on the American people, like on a constituent, on a citizen, because you were campaigning, right? So for us, the biggest test in 2012 was Hurricane Sandy. So October 25th, I'll never forget it. Sandy made landfall in Puerto Rico and it made its way over to the US. It impacted 17 states. Barack Obama was in Washington, D.C. We actually had to make the decision to just get him out of Washington before the hurricane came so that he could continue campaigning if we had to. But we had to come up with a very specific process because there were people suffering and he was acutely aware of that. So for us, it was first thing he did in the morning when he got up, we had a briefing. We figured out what governors we were going to call. He wanted to talk to county executives, mayors, borough presidents in Manhattan. We had a full, instead of campaigning, which you will see all the Trump people doing right now, instead of campaigning, we had most of the cabinet in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, making sure that things were getting done, talking to business owners, figuring out why the stock exchange crapped out, all those things. And so because Barack Obama said that there was like not one thing that was worth, there was not one city that we could get to campaigning that was worth any resources being diverted from the response and recovery of the Northeast. So it's very stressful. You never want to leave. You don't, for me, I mean, like, I think that was probably the least I ever slept. Actually, after the election, I was like, I have to quit. Like, I'm done. Like, I was so worn out and I was essentially the no police. You know, it's like cabinet secretaries were like, oh, I was invited to this event. And I'd be like, no, that language is wrong. It's a 501c4. I mean, it was like, you name it. And I had questions about it. I oversaw every plane manifest for every government aircraft that left to make sure that no one was ever shady with anything or trying to bring like campaign people or anybody with them. And then, of course, I had the campaign, God bless them, in 2012, being like, don't fuck it up, Alyssa. Like, we have to win. I was like, thank you. I'm employed here. I appreciate that. I know we have to win. But you know, for us, one of the interesting things that we faced was that, of course, Chris Christie was the governor of New Jersey back then. And he was facing pressure to be kind of a dick to us. And he was like, they're helping me. And people were like, Barack Obama, why are you taking pictures with Chris Christie? And he was kind of like, fuck off. Like, New Jersey needs me. And so that was like an interesting moment too. So yeah, it was very hard. These people, be clear right now, there is no governing happening whatsoever. Like you can't even count Amy Coney Barrett being nominated as governing because it is just brazenly political. So they're not governing, but everyone, George Bush governed. I mean, like, you can't, I've never seen any administration like this ever.
So I feel like I personally, and maybe I can speak for a lot of the American public when I say that I've taken the peaceful transition of power for granted, perhaps, for my whole life.
Yeah.
And we saw in the debate that Trump tried to delegitimize the mail-in ballot system. And he's already said that he'll, quote, see what happens when he has to commit to a peaceful transition of power. So Alicia P. and Ben R. specifically wanted to know, what do you think would happen if either of the candidates refused to accept the election results. And Emily S. also had questions about the role that the Supreme Court could play in this scenario.
It's so many kinds of bad. So someone who's interesting to follow on this subject is Ben Ginsburg, who is actually a Republican electoral lawyer. He's very, very smart. And because I don't know, I mean, I'm just like a normal person for the most part. I don't know what the fuck would really happen if none of them, if like neither of them would say like, I don't accept it. Luckily, there are scholars who do know. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting that Ben Ginsburg was saying is that this essentially comes down to the states. States have to certify the vote. They have to say who won. So, for example, say the state of Michigan is up for Trump, right? But they haven't certified. They have X number of mail-in ballots. Like there are so many things that they take into consideration before they certify a vote. So the truth is, I believe that ultimately Republican state legislators would not let there be some psychotic miscarriage of this election. I genuinely do. And Joe Biden is an institutionalist, right? If the state certified he won, he's going to declare victory. And if the state certified he didn't win, he will concede and he will be a good person. I mean, at some point, the Republicans, especially Senate Republicans, if Trump is losing and not transitioning, they're going to have to get involved. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. Now, the one thing that's a bit, I don't want to say interesting, but heartening maybe, is that granted, Trump has run out a lot of the people he likes to call the deep state. They're just career, and the reason that career employees are really important. So Trump will call all of them Obama people and deep state. No, those very people he's talking about, most of them worked for Bush, some before that even Clinton. And the whole point of career employees, which no one talks about, is the peaceful transition of power. And they're the ones with the institutional knowledge. They're the ones who know how things happen. I believe there are still enough of them there who know, but we know too. And I will say that one of the most kind of humbling things ever was how the Bush folks treated us during the transition. Gracious, thoughtful, super prepared. Like when we basically got into office, our number one priority in like right after the inauguration was like, we have to maintain all these binders they did so we can pass them on to whoever comes after us, because what they did for us made our lives so much easier. Like you guys, when you get into the White House, the things that you have to figure out, it's not like, I mean, on one level, you've got like, which foreign leader do you call back first, which is like a whole conversation unto itself. But you have like, for us, Barack Obama was like the first day after inauguration, I want to do an event. I want to swear people in. And so my deputy, Danielle, she and I, we didn't even go to the inauguration. We couldn't because we were the first people sworn in at the White House. And so we had to actually be online outside the White House before Obama was actually sworn in so that we could walk in at like 12:01 p.m., whatever it was. And we had to find a room for him to do this event in. And some of the rooms were taken over because they're moving the bushes out and we were moving in. And so we find this one room, the Indian Treaty Room. We're like, it's picturesque, it's beautiful, like it's going to look like Barack Obama's president, you know. And then we found out that there's still copper wiring in this room, which means that TV cameras can't go live from it. Things I didn't know. So there is so much. So we learned that. We added it to our transition binder. So 2012, here we are as White House Deputy Chief. I'm actually in charge of onboarding the Romney people in case they win. So about midsummer, July, August, I guess it was, you start communicating with people on the Romney team and you're gracious and you're helpful. And you're like, here are the forms for you to start filling out for your security clearance. And here's what you need to know. And so that's why, even though I didn't want Mitt Romney to win, I understood that part of our legacy would be how we treated the Romney people from the minute we were introduced to them, as it was when the Bush people onboarded us in the early fall of 2008, before the election had even happened. So I have faith in the career folks and none in Donald Trump. So I think that the institutions that we feel are failing us now will hopefully come through in the end.
I am right there with you. I'm also hoping that this January will be nothing to write home about. We've had a very interesting 2020, and I hope we get a nice start to 2021.
Yeah, let's just go on vacation in 2021 if we can ever fly again.
So I have one more question before I want to open it up to the audience. Many different people, including Sona D, Jake B, and Calvin B, asked about how we can find unity in this moment of division. Calvin asked, in the wake of the killings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and other countless Black bodies, we are in a time of crisis and national protest. How can America find unity surrounding the upcoming election?
So I go back to what I was saying earlier, which is about curiosity. So I live in a place, for most of my time, I'm in New York City, but for the past 204 days, I have been here in upstate New York, in a place that that voted Obama, Bernie primary in 2016, and then I think Trump in the general. So it's a very complicated place politically. And the thing that I have found is that very often we do not know why people say they are voting for who they vote for, right? So instead of meeting someone, a couple days ago, I'm in my car, which from the front is a very nondescript blue Subaru. And I pull up to this guy who's, there's construction work, and he's moving the traffic along. And I had a nice conversation with him. I was joking with him. And then I started to pull forward, and he's like, fucking Bernie, because I have a Bernie bumper sticker and an EW bumper sticker and a bunch of other bumper stickers on my car. And he was like, fucking Bernie. And I was like, am I any different than I was 2.5 minutes ago? And he was like, no. I was like, there you go. And so I think that that's kind of a good way to think about things. And as much as it's very hard for me personally to see someone who's voting for Trump, who says they're going to vote for Trump, and not be like, that makes you racist. Like, that makes you racist. Some people, especially people who've lived through a lot more in their life than I have, feel they can bifurcate, right? Like, no, I don't support that. I just don't want my taxes to go up. So I think sometimes understanding where people are coming from helps you to have an actual productive conversation. And the other thing to remember is that the people that we see are a virulent, loud minority. This is not like the bulk of America. This is just a small fringe. This is minority rule right now. It's a small fringe. Sorry, my mom's calling. It's a small fringe of the country. And so you just have to remember that. And, for me, it's hard sometimes because I see, Trump lawn sign after Trump lawn sign. I went to go visit my friend Chelsea up in Maine, and I was like, girl, I saw so many Trump signs. And then this is the thing. This is why you always have to be curious. And so I said, I was on a Zoom with Sarah Gideon, who's running against Susan Collins, queen of the frowning chamber, consistently disappointed in everything that's happening, but does nothing about it. So I'm on with Sarah Gideon. I'm like, girl, I was just in Maine. Why do you not have lawn signs? Like, I was freaking out. And she's like, oh, no, because we have strategy. We'd send all of our lawn signs out over one weekend so that when people start driving to work on Monday, it's like they've blanketed the place with lawn signs, and it's like a show of force. And I was like, it's fucking dope. I get it. And so I think that panicking, don't panic. Nobody panic. Panic is not productive. I think that when you meet somebody who believes different than you do, or at least, has the Trump shirt on or something, or you're at a family holiday, maybe just like take a minute and figure out why. Because you may find out that they're like deep into some weird QAnon conspiracy theory on Facebook and they don't even know it. I mean, like there's just so many ways that this has like been in, like that his garbage has infiltrated, that I think, and as much as you can keep an open mind and try to learn more about people before you judge them, that we might get to like a slightly better place.
So I'm going to go ahead and transition to the live Q&A questions. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Alyssa.
Oh God.
My telephone is ringing somewhere in the White House right now.
Mm-hmm.
So while we were on this call, it was just announced that Hope Hicks has tested positive for COVID-19, and she traveled with the president to the debate. So Alex C. would like to know if Trump were to test positive, which I'm not sure they would release to the public, but if he were, they would not. But if they were, what effect do you think that would have?
On like the country or the debates?
Either. Alex says specifically on the country.
I can't believe, see, at least, you know, I'm fully focused on you because I was not checking Twitter. Hope Hicks was with, I mean, look, the right thing to do is for them to quarantine. Like that's the, like, you know, I guess they can keep saying that Trump gets tested every day, but I don't know. I just, it's, the problem is, let me tell you the problem with Hope Hicks testing positive. Did they say if she was symptomatic or not?
I don't, Alex did not report whether she was
symptomatic. Okay. So say she's not symptomatic. I actually have concerns about that because it feeds into this COVID's fucking nothing narrative that they're trying to spin. And so, see, it's like, I feel like everyone thought I was going to have a different answer. And I was like, oh my God, it's really bad. Not because I'm worried that she's sick. I mean, I wish sickness on no one, but because I think that they're going to release, you guys watch the next couple of days. They're going to release pictures of her with her gorgeous finesse blown out hair, looking like thin and in her suit and put together, and she'll have blush on and she'll be all made up as all women are. That is the one thing that my ladies in the White House, we still do not understand. If I brushed my teeth before I made it in, it was a good day. And these women have like full faces of makeup on. We're like, not a chance that ever would have happened. But so I think it is not great because if she is not symptomatic, which I hope she's not symptomatic, they're going to be like, see, you're all so dramatic. She's got it. She's fine. Trump's tested. He doesn't have it, even though we'll never know. I personally believe that he had it back in like February when he was with the Brazilian delegation and every single one of them got it. And he was like so close to them, which is why I think he's been so brazen, because he has immunity. That's my personal QAnon conspiracy theory. But yeah, I think it's, I don't root for her to be sick. And so if she is asymptomatic, I think they will use it as a, you crybaby, overly dramatic liberals, and you're, so bummer.
We'll see. Time will tell.
Time will tell.
I want to squeeze probably 3 more questions in if we
have. Sure.
So the first one is from Allison L, and she wanted to know what it's been like to work with Crooked, and if you have any projects on the horizon that you'd like to share with us.
Sure. I love Crooked. Jon Favreau graduated from Holy Cross in May of 2004. And 2 days after his graduation, he showed up at the Kerry campaign. And until the day he left the White House, we had never been separated. He is my brother. Tommy, John Lovett, all those guys. I'm so proud of them. They hedged, they kind of get shit now. They're like, oh, the guys from Crooked. And it's like they hedged on podcasting when nobody thought that it was going to be a thing. And now it's a thing. Hysteria is getting bigger and bigger. We have great interviews this week with America Ferrera and Gwen Moore from Wisconsin, who goes deep into a lot of the questions. She's much more of an expert than I am. A lot of questions about voting and what happens if we don't have an outcome on election day. My other projects I can't talk about right now, except I have a video series on Crooked. We just launched the first episode last week. It's called Let's Break It Down, where I go through, I personally think that we need a little bit more context and a little less punditry. And so I'm trying to do less punditry. And this is where we go behind certain events. The first one we did was the first debate. I wasn't entirely wrong in some of my predictions that I did with Robert Gibbs, who I mentioned before. And then next week, we're talking about what goes into putting together an election night. And the archival footage alone is must see. But other than that, it's like, I'm sure like so many of you and so many of your parents, who I'm roughly the same age as, I lost most of my work in March. And so I've just been kind of putting things back together since then and doing a little bit here and a little bit there. I've made 400 jars of jam this summer. I even developed logo labels, so be on the lookout on Instagram. I may be giving some away. But you know, there's an interesting interview. There's a new show coming out this weekend called The Good Lord Bird. And it's on Showtime, and it's starring Ethan Hawke. And Ethan Hawke did this great interview on CBS this morning, and he talked about how he started painting during COVID because his brain was just doing like weird things if he didn't have something to prove for himself every day. And I was like, oh my God, I feel so seen, because that's what my jam making was. It's like if you go through sort of my arc, you know, whether it was on the campaign or in the White House, I had certain things every single day that I couldn't not do. Like, you know, like every day I had to produce. And so being in a place where that wasn't the case, I was like, gonna have to find something. So that's jam entrepreneur, amateur jam entrepreneur is my current project.
I've been loving your jam update. Great. So we have like 4 more minutes, and I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 more questions. So
we can just do the 2 questions. It's okay. You don't have to rush.
First, from Gabrielle B. She wants to know, after the polling mishaps in 2016, do you personally trust the polls that currently show Biden being ahead? And how worried are you about having a repeat of 2016 in these last days before the election?
I don't believe polling. I don't. I think that you have the virulent, loud minority of people who are proud to vote for Trump, but there are still tons of people who will vote for him who know they should be embarrassed to say it out loud. And so do I think the polling's off by 10 points? No, but I'd say that we're probably going to go into election day within the margin of error, right? Within 4 or 5 points. And at that point, it comes down to turnout. So everyone needs to vote. Everyone. And truthfully, all of you folks, young, healthy, knock wood, if you can be poll workers, please sign up to be poll workers. So many of our poll workers in America are like over the age of 65 and super high risk, and they should not be doing this for this election, because I'm sure some of you have heard it, but like my parents should vote absentee. Like they shouldn't go into a polling place. Like they're over 65, and I think they should be safe. And they're like, over my dead body, is he going to try to discount my vote? Like I'm going in there. And every single person I know up here over 65 is like, I'm voting in person. I'm not going to be discounted. And so I think that's true. I think that on election day, I think our polling places could be really overwhelmed. I think one thing that people aren't talking about is that so many of the schools where we've sent kids back to are polling places. And if they have COVID outbreaks and have to close, so goes the polling location. So I would say, if you can, please be a poll worker, do what you can. And no, I don't believe the polling. Not in the way that, do I think Biden's ahead? I do. I think he's ahead. Do I think that can change? Totally. And it's not like, and the one thing that you'll see is that while Biden is campaigning a little bit more moderate than I would like to see, he is spending a lot of time in places that Hillary won by thin margins, like Michigan and Wisconsin, where the electoral votes are really important for us to get. So that's my answer.
So I want to end this discussion on a little bit of a happy note.
Oh,
Um,
great.
so Josh B had a very important question, in my opinion.
Okay.
He says, do you have any favorite memories of the First Lady? Obviously,
Mm.
we work very closely with President Obama, but we stand Michelle too.
Okay. So the best foreign trips were the ones that Michelle was on. Um, I always referred to her as FLOTUS, even though I knew her as Michelle way before any of it. Um, One of my favorite stories. So the Obamas were very big on going to national parks every summer. And one of the first trips that we took was to Yellowstone, and we went whitewater rafting in Montana. Well, I actually think the guys were going fly fishing, and it was always a little weird because more women traveled with Michelle because her staff was almost entirely women. And then I was the woman with mostly dudes for the most part. And so they were going fly fishing. And I was like, I don't want to go fly fishing. And Michelle was like, come whitewater rafting with us. And they're all tall. I mean, Malia was taller than me by the time we got to the White House, and Sasha's taller than me now. So we get to whitewater rafting, and they had wetsuits for everybody because even though it was the summer, it was still like sleeting. Truthfully, it was sleeting in Montana. So Michelle and Sasha and Malia are like, oh, you should be in the front. That's like, it's like the best spot. And I was like, great. So I'm in a wetsuit that's way too big. The sleeves had to roll up. The crotch was to my knees. Everyone was making fun of me. And then I found out that when you're going through class 3 rapids and you're in the front, it's really awful. And at the end, I was drenched and I was so upset. I was like, you guys are awful. And they're like, you should have Googled. Like, we Googled. You should have Googled, because we knew what it meant to be in the front seat. But no, the thing about Michelle is that she was always about enjoying experiences. And so sometimes when POTUS would be really busy doing stuff, she'd be like, don't you want to come with us? I'd be like, sure. So I actually went on a couple trips just with the First Lady. When she went to South Africa, we went to Pretoria, we went to go see Nelson Mandela. And the thing that you see with President Obama that's even more magnified by Michelle is like how much just seeing her to people around the world, like them being close to her, seeing her on their television, like just means so much to people. And that was something that was like never, ever lost on us. But my be all end all favorite Michelle story. When you travel, you can't really hide things from people. So both Michelle and Secretary Clinton knew that I had very sensitive stomach, to the point that sometimes Secretary Clinton would just be like, stop, eat a granola bar. What are you doing? And I was like, I'm so hungry. She'd be like, just stop, eat a granola bar. So that I didn't eat weird indigenous food that was going to upset my stomach. But so we're in a country, big, amazing state dinner. Michelle so believed that being a good guest was being engaged, being curious. And so the guys a lot of the times would be like on their Blackberries. And I was always the one leading like the conga line with the tourism minister in like these different countries. But one of the last trips we went on, we were at this dinner and Michelle's at one end of the table, or the First Lady's at one end of the table, and I'm in the middle. And she's like signaling to me. And I'm like, no, girl, I'm doing it. Like, I like ate all these weird meats I'd never had before. And they're like serving it family style. And she was like, stop it. And I'm like, what? Stop, I'm doing it. Turns out what she was trying to tell me was that the hand towels they were giving us between courses were not being entirely properly sanitized. So at the end of the dinner, I was like, what was going on? She's like, I was trying to tell you not to use the hand towel. And I was like, why? She's like, because Secret Service said they weren't being like properly sanitized. Fast forward just 36 hours where I developed the worst case of Giardia, like notes, ma'am. We did not know what was wrong with me. I had to be like rushed to the White House medical unit. I thought my ovaries were bursting. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was like on the floor, like some chalk outline in a Law and Order episode, until the doctors were like, I think you have Giardia. I'm like, what's Giardia? Like in upstate New York, it's known as beaver fever because beavers get it in the dam, or they give it in dams. I don't know. So they tell Michelle, not going to believe it, Alyssa's got Giardia. She's like, I was like, yeah, I'll always understand you or clarify whatever you're saying. And I know you always have my best interest at heart. She's like, exactly. So anyway, you should stand her because she is the best. And she's so funny. And she just always, she was the best. She was the best. She was.
Yeah,
Don't tell POTUS. Don't tell POTUS.
you miss
They'll be
Michelle.
so mad.
I miss Barack, but I miss Michelle. I do.
Well, hopefully, I hope everyone's following her when we all vote, because it's very important and she's putting like a lot of work into it. And I think it's really powerful. So I hope you check it out.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, Alyssa. This was absolute joy to have you. Thank you so much for answering my endless barrage of questions.
No, you guys, look, you're excellent. This was excellent. This was one of the best Zooms I've ever done. And Ruby and Olivia, you are stars. And Emory, I hope you stay COVID free through whenever you're there and that you stay safe and that you have like a little bit of fun while you're still there.
Thank you. We're all going to sign off. All of y'all have a great weekend and thanks for joining us.
Vote.